Thank you very much, Mike. Problem is, there was a past of Tim Albritton before I became that forester, and that's what Bill kind of got me concerned. He started talking about all this memory loss and all that stuff. And man, the 70s were bad to me, you know, the late 70s. I was like, I lost a lot of memory before I ever went to school, you know. So it was, you know, so I started off behind the curve, and then he's talking about all this memory loss that we've, you know, over the past 10 or 15 years. So that's why I brought my notes with me, so we make sure we cover everything. I am one of the few speakers today that seems to be from Alabama. We've had North Carolina and you know, Missouri and Arkansas and all over. And you know, Saturday wasn't good to Alabama and Auburn football team. And you know, we're ready. Football's not fun anymore. We're ready to move on to shortleaf pine. You know, so we're ready to completely focus our efforts on shortleaf pine and not talk about football at any of the breaks. That's not any good. So make sure I got this thing right here. There we go. I'm going to cover a little bit information here about just kind of what shortleaf in Alabama is like and our breakdown. And I attribute a lot of this information here to my good friend Brian Hendricks with the Alabama Forestry Commission. He is working in the FIA there in Alabama. So this is going to be kind of a snapshot of where shortleaf pine is in the state. The picture there to the right, that's me down there at the base of it. You know, I didn't have one of these pretty pictures up on a mountaintop or nothing, so I just stopped in the medium there at I-85 going through Montgomery, and I saw this shortleaf. I'll get a picture of that. So that's the best I could do. But anyway, that was an impressive tree. But out of the 23 million acres of timberland in Alabama, this number a couple of years ago was 175,000 acres are comprised of shortleaf pine stands, and that's the definition, over 50%. And we've already heard from some of the speakers, a lot of the shortleaf pine, you know, are these stands that there's a small component of shortleaf pine. Not many of them are going to be over, you know, 50%. So you can see what a small percentage, and that was a few years ago. I asked Brian, I said, look at my slide, make sure I got the latest data. Well, that number's actually gone down because Clarence and Mike are going out cutting down these shortleaf pines, making plaques. So the number's like at 145,000 now. So if y'all stop making these plaques, we might be able to turn things around. Unless you made one for me, then we'll kind of accept it anyway. So shortleaf pine facts, another one, 71% of all the shortleaf pine stands are predominantly saw timber size. And I was thinking, well, that makes sense, right? Because who's planting shortleaf pine, right? They're all going to be older stands. Nobody's out there planting them. I worked with the FIA for several years, and they were. I think Jim had a slide earlier that showed the number of plots each state has that has a shortleaf in it, you know, shortleaf tree in it. Alabama had like 500 stands that had shortleaf pine in it. Well, there's over 5,000 plots in Alabama. So we're talking, you know, less than 10% of you know, all the plots in Alabama have shortleaf pine, and most of those are going to be these older saw timber sized trees. Nobody's planting them. So, and you know, it's probably for good reason. The loblolly folks have kind of convinced landowners, hey, you want to plant something, grow it fast, get it to pulpwood size, go there, you know, right? Who's promoting shortleaf pine? Until here recently. Now we've started to try to, you know, change the tide of that. I think we've made some strides, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. More facts, the loblolly pine in Alabama is the forest type that has more acres than any other. But this is a good point that Brian brought out, that of these loblolly pine stands, you know, forest type, their shortleaf is a component of that. So even though the FIA data may show that there's not a lot of shortleaf pine stands, it's still a component of a lot of these other forest types. And that's something we need to kind of think about and work with as we work with landowners, that there is some shortleaf out there mixed in some of these other hardwood and pine stands, and maybe we can do some, as mentioned earlier, some understory treatments to enhance natural regeneration and improve that. Here again, more ranking numbers of volume. This is Alabama, so you see we were 7th on the shortleaf. based, because of the harvesting and the plaque making and everything, shortleafs dropped down. Slash is actually in there at 7th. Now shortleafs dropped down to 8th. So this is just a 16% drop in the volumes over the past 3 or 4 years. So I mean, there's still this decline going on. It wasn't just something that occurred in the 50s and 60s. I mean, this is still occurring as FIA data is being collected in Alabama anyway, and I suspect some of the other states as well. This is just for your information that, we do have a champion tree program in the state, like a lot of the other states, where basically some basic measurements are taken on the circumference, height, crown width. This is Alabama's champion shortleaf pine. The shortleaf pine, this was 2005. We recognized in Alabama, EQIP, we were planting loblolly. Then, there was some of this interest of, longleaf, and we'd always been planting hardwoods along the streams. And me and our biologist in Alabama, Jeff Thurman, we got together and said, we ought to do something really significant and change the world. We'll add shortleaf pine to our EQIP species list. Well, we just, sweated over that, and we finally, got it approved, added shortleaf pine to our species list. Thought we had really done something good. We didn't do nothing. I mean, all you do is add species to the list. That don't mean anything to a landowner. How many landowners are going to come in our office and say, I saw your species list, you added shortleaf, I want to plant it on my property? That didn't happen. In fact, it didn't happen for years. It was like no registered, there was not a blip on the radar, nothing. And so I was like, well, we got to do something besides just adding shortleaf pine to our EQIP species list. That didn't do it. Well, and I was surprised at lunch to discover that Chris Irwin's not on the agenda. I'm going to speak for Chris. Chris and I and several other partners, the Forestry Commission, the Department of Conservation in Alabama, the Treasure Forest Association, we all got together with this NIFWIF grant, and we got this thing going, and Chris is with the American Forest Foundation. We got all these partners together. We started having some workshops to train consultant foresters in the state. Then we started having some field days and some workshops for landowners. Then we're mailing out these cards and information packets to landowners, and we got consultant foresters visiting with those landowners, and now things are starting to happen. So to me, it's all about the partnership that you kind of develop. And if you're with NRCS or you're with one of the state agencies and you think, just by adding something to the list is going to change the world, it's not. You got to get some folks together and get the word out to landowners and really, educate them. Like the poster up here says, why shortleaf? Landowners don't know. They don't have a clue. In fact, my wife's with me on this trip. She's my wife. She don't have a clue. And I mean, what is this shortleaf? She doesn't care. She just never been to Knoxville. She wanted to come with me to Knoxville. It doesn't have anything to do with shortleaf. She doesn't know what it's about. My own son works for the Alabama Forestry Commission. I had to try to convince him last weekend. I said, I'm going to a conference going to talk about shortleaf. He's like, why shortleaf? It's my son, so it took me 15 minutes to convince him, So anyway, we got to do something besides just add it to a list. Well, there is assistance available. In Alabama, this is the area we selected, mainly because a lot of the central part of the state, this is the northern part, obviously, the central counties had the little leaf disease, and we really didn't want to get into dealing with planting shortleaf and having little leaf disease, and they're still having issues there in some of those counties, the soil types and all. So up in the north part of the state, there was less of that high hazard soil type for little leaf disease. So we thought we'd be safe in just kind of promoting it up in the northern counties. These are the areas where we're promoting it. And this is where we're having those workshops and events, and where we have some consultant foresters meeting with the landowners that are kind of getting information packets mailed to them. If they raise their hand and they're interested in something about shortleaf, we get a landowner and a forester together. We invite them to one of our workshops. We're kind of getting the message out. It's helping. This is just one of those planted sites that Jim Schrankel, a biologist with the Department of Conservation, planted. He's one of the strange guys in the world. He just wanted to plant shortleaf on his property. Several years ago, I went up here to Tennessee and visited their nursery, got some shortleaf pine, came back to Alabama, was trying to give them away. Couldn't find anybody to take them. Kind of like George trying to give that Auburn cap away this morning. Nobody to take it but me. But anyway, nobody wanted the trees. I finally got Jim Schrinkle. He said, yeah, I'll plant them. So he planted some, and this is that stand that he planted back in '06, and chemical site prep. Followed that with 9 by 12 spacing, had good survival, and this is after the 5th growing season. This is up in North Alabama, and so Jim is pleased with it, the growth and what he's got. We can do more of this, although I think we're kind of fighting an uphill battle to find landowners who are willing to devote open land, clear cuts, that kind of thing that they're wanting to plant just to shortleaf plantations. Although that is an opportunity and we shouldn't turn away from it, and I think we're getting more and more folks interested in it. However, I still think well, let me talk about our rates first. In our EQIP, these are our rates. Now, if you can't see that in the back, payment rate, this is for our tree establishment, that's trees and the labor of planting, $160 per acre. That's pretty good. Would you agree? I mean, that's pretty good. HU rate is historically underserved, 192. So that's our rate for tree planting. For site preparation, just your typical cutover, we'd typically go with a herbicide application, $73 for the herbicide application, and then prescribed burning, $21. So essentially, you're talking over $250 site prep, burn, plant, shortleaf pine. Sometimes that pyramid thing that Wayne was talking about, sometimes all that pyramid is just a dollar sign. You show that to a landowner and they'll come to you. And I think we can probably accomplish that with a lot of landowners who just want some help planting some trees, and if no help for loblolly is there, they'll come to us for shortleaf. And so sometimes you just do that. However, with forest stand improvement, I think is really where we ought to focus. A lot of these stands that exist where shortleaf is a component, we really ought to talk to landowners about some other things to consider besides just clear cutting it and trying to plant a shortleaf pine plantation. And in EQIP, we do have some other practices that we're offering. Understory release, which I think in our first talk of the day, Jim was talking about doing something with that hardwood understory. If you do something early, kind of get rid of it with chemicals and then follow that with some burning. If you have shortleaf as a component in the main canopy, you kind of make some headway there. Hardwood crop tree release would not necessarily be a bad thing if there was pine mixed in that hardwood stand and you're releasing some of those hardwood crop trees, but that would bring more sunlight to the ground. Could be something there, pre-commercial thinning, and then prescribed burning. So see, these are some other practices landowners could consider with existing stands that I really think we need to get the message across to them. It's not just about site prep and tree planting. We can do this with some of these workshops and some of these forester landowner visits that we're scheduling with our program. Just thought I'd add this in there for those of you who do have land in Alabama. We have a deadline, October 16th. Get your application in before that to be considered in our next batching. That's what we do. We accept applications year round, but we do have a batching period where we kind of close it out and rank them, and just thought I'd throw that in there. Other states, I'm sure, the same way. Michael from Georgia, same deal. So you need to find out what the batching date is for your state. Make sure the landowners understand that and they get their application in on time. A lot more information is available if you go to any of our state websites. This one's Alabama, and click on programs. You can get a lot more detailed information. And with that, I'll open it up for questions if we got time, but I reserve the right to say I don't know, because I got some guys in the back going to heckle me and try to ask some tough questions, but the 70s were rough on me, so there you go. Question?